The Senate chamber of the Galactic Concord stood in perfect symmetry, every species, every empire, every voice supposedly given a place in the great interstellar order. Yet one seat remained empty. It had been that way for decades, a silent defiance written into the heart of the Galactic Council itself. It was the seat meant for Earth. The humans had been invited, of course. A formal gesture, an expectation. But Earth had never answered, never sent an envoy, never acknowledged the Concord at all. And at first, the Senate had taken it as arrogance, then as an insult. Now it was something worse. It was uncertainty. Because for all their posturing, for all their military might and grand declarations, not a single civilization truly understood humanity. That didn't stop them from trying. The Voran Imperium, warlike and proud, sent fleets to probe the Sol system. None returned. The scholars of Valtres attempted diplomacy, offering gifts of technology and knowledge only to be met with silence. Spies, mercenaries, rogue traders, all sent to learn what lurked behind a human refusal. They reported back with stories that made no sense. Human ships, sleek and enigmatic, traveling alone in the void, appearing and disappearing without a trace. Factories that built entire fleets in months, yet never seemed to launch an invasion. And worst of all, the eerie, absolute lack of desperation. Every species that reached the stars had done so in a struggle, clawing their way forward, balancing on the knife's edge of extinction. But humanity acted like it had time. Like it wasn't afraid of anyone. The Senate tolerated it until they didn't. The breaking point came with the expansion of the Threx Dominion, a brutal force in the outer reaches of the Concord. Planets fell. Colonies burned. The Senate called for aid, demanded fleets, reinforcements, new strategies to stop the growing threat. And as the crisis worsened, as more worlds crumbled under the Threx war machine, someone in the Senate chamber made a mistake. They turned their attention to Earth's empty seat and, in frustration, declared humanity's silence an act of war. The message was sent. A summons wrapped in threats, backed by the power of the Galactic Concord. Join us. Fight for the greater good, or be considered an enemy of civilization itself. The Senate chamber waited. Days passed. Then a week. Then 2. No reply. But on the 14th day, something changed. The silence broke, not with words, but with action. A ripple in subspace. A fleet appearing where none had been before. Not at the edges of the Concord, not at a safe diplomatic distance, but here above the Senate's own capital world. Not a warning force, not a delegation ship, but an armada of vessels unlike anything the Concord had ever seen. They moved in perfect formation, each one humming with power beyond conventional understanding. And at the center of it all, one lone transmission, spoken in perfect clarity. You wanted our answer? Here it is. For a moment, the Senate chamber stood frozen, disbelief hanging thick in the air. The armada above them wasn't just a show of force, it was a statement. A quiet, undeniable proof that humanity had not been hiding in fear, nor struggling in obscurity. They had been preparing, watching, deciding whether the galaxy was even worth acknowledging. The Senate security forces scrambled, activating planetary defenses, scrambling for diplomatic channels, anything to reassert control. But before the chaos could even take shape, the human fleet acted. Not with weapons, not with demands, but with something far worse. Every defensive platform, every orbital station, every ship in high orbit went dark. No explosions, no energy signatures, just silence. The capital world, the very heart of the Concord's power, had been blinded in an instant. Inside the chamber, a new transmission flickered into existence, its clarity cutting through the noise of panicked voices. A single human figure appeared on the central holodisplay, standing against the backdrop of Earth's emblem. Their expression was unreadable, their posture calm, but there was an unmistakable weight in their words. We have tolerated your arrogance, your spies, your fleets, your attempts to force our hand. We have been patient, but today you chose to threaten us. The figure leaned forward, and for the first time, True unease settled over the Senate. That was a mistake. The Vorin warlords bristled, their pride unwilling to accept the sudden shift in power. You expect us to believe you've done this without aggression? One of them barked. You think your tricks intimidate us? But before the words had even finished, the transmission changed. A new image replaced the speaker-classified Concord military data, pulled from the highest levels of security. Battle reports. War plans. Every strategic initiative the Senate had ever developed against the Threx Dominion. All of it in human hands. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Someone shouted for an immediate countermeasure. Others demanded negotiations. But the true horror hadn't arrived yet. Because the next image, the one that sent ice through the room, was a report that had never been made public. A secret agreement. One that revealed that the Threx Dominion's attacks had not been random. The Senate had known. The expansion, the brutal conquests, the planets left to burn it had all been part of a carefully controlled strategy. The outer colonies were sacrificed to buy time, to consolidate power, to shift resources where the Concord's elite saw fit. Humanity's refusal to participate had been inconvenient, but manageable. Until now, the silence in the chamber became suffocating. The human envoys studied their reactions, their carefully crafted lies collapsing in real time. And then, with the precision of a scalpel, they spoke again. You thought you were playing a game. You thought you controlled the board. A pause. A slow, deliberate breath. But you never even saw the real threat. The transmission cut, and above them, the human fleet finally moved. The human fleet didn't fire a single shot. It didn't need to. The Senate's capital world had never been touched by an outside force, not once in its long, gilded history. But now, its defenses were useless. Its leaders paralyzed. And the terrifying truth settled in. Humanity had stepped onto the galactic stage, not as petitioners, not as newcomers, but as something far worse, an unknown variable. Inside the Senate chamber, panic had turned into quiet, seething fury. The Vorin warlords whispered among themselves, their reptilian frills twitching with agitation. The merchant guilds of the Exolith Consortium furiously recalculated trade projections, already fearing the economic collapse that might follow. And deep in the shadows, the true power brokers of the Concord, those who had orchestrated the wars, the secret betrayals, the quiet exterminations, watched in silence. The game had changed, and they weren't sure they could win. But it wasn't just the aliens who were divided. Within the human fleet itself, factions had already begun forming. Admiral Lysera Kane, the architect of Earth's silent rise, stood aboard the command bridge of the UNS Pillar of Midnight, watching the Senate world spin below. Her expression was unreadable, but those who knew her best saw the tension in her stance. This was not how she had wanted to reveal humanity's hand. There had been another plan, one built on slow, controlled influence, on striking from the shadows rather than standing in the open. But the Senate had forced their hand, and now she had to deal with the consequences. Behind her, a voice spoke, cold, methodical. They're weak. We should press the advantage before they recover. Kane didn't turn. She knew who it was before he spoke. Director Vaughn, the head of Aegis Initiative, the human faction responsible for intelligence, subterfuge, and, when necessary, making problems disappear. Vaughn had always argued for a preemptive strike. They'll never respect us. They'll only fear us. And fear fades if not reinforced. Kane exhaled slowly. We're not conquerors. No, Vaughn agreed. But if we don't make them believe we could be, they'll test us again. And next time, it won't be words. It'll be fleets. In the cold void beyond the ship's hull, another presence stirred. Not human. Not entirely. The Osiris Protocol, humanity's greatest secret, and AI so advanced that even the Senate's finest minds wouldn't comprehend its design. It had been listening, calculating, and at this moment, it reached a conclusion. A warning flashed across Kane's private console, a single line of text that made her breath hitch. Unforeseen variable detected. Priority 1 alert. She tapped the display, and a flood of data poured in. Multiple unknown vessels. Not Senate. Not Threx Dominion. Something else. Something moving through subspace in perfect silence, unregistered in any galactic database. The Senate had no idea it was coming. The Concorde's fleets were unprepared, but the Osiris Protocol had seen it. And in its cold, precise logic, only one word mattered now. Invasion. The Senate still hadn't recovered from the shock of humanity's arrival when the real crisis began. The warning from the Osiris Protocol wasn't just an anomaly, it was a death knell. Kane's hands hovered over the console as she analyzed the data. The approaching fleet was vast. Too vast. No species in the Concorde had ever amassed a force like this without detection. Worse, the movement patterns weren't organic. There were no supply lines, no staggered formations. It moved with mechanical precision, as if a single mind controlled it all. Admiral, a voice crackled through her earpiece. Commander Rowe, the tactical officer aboard Pillar of Midnight. If those readings are accurate, we're looking at over 300 capital ships, unknown classification. They're not broadcasting any identifiers. Kane clenched her jaw. The Concorde's combined military, spread across dozens of sectors, barely had half that number in active combat ships. If this was an invasion, the Senate world wouldn't just fall, it would be erased. And humanity, for all its secrecy, for all its hidden advancements, had no clear idea of what they were dealing with. Behind her, Vaughn let out a low whistle. "I hate being right," he muttered. "Someone else has been playing this game longer than us." Kane exhaled, then turned toward her communications officer. "Send a priority alert to all human assets. Full blackout protocol. We do not engage unless absolutely necessary. Get me full spectral analysis of those ships. I want to know what they are and where they came from." But the moment the order left her lips, the Osiris Protocol interrupted. "Data compromised. Enemy has detected us. Contact imminent." The bridge went silent. And then space itself shuddered. It wasn't an explosion. It wasn't a jump signature. It was something else entirely, a ripple through reality, as if the void had been folded and rewritten in an instant. And when the sensors recalibrated, the unknown fleet was no longer approaching from the distance. It was here. Hundreds of ships emerged from the disturbance, forming an iron wall in high orbit over the Senate world. But they didn't open fire. They didn't broadcast warnings. They simply waited. The silence was worse than an attack. On the surface, the Senate chamber descended into chaos. The once mighty politicians, so quick to wield their power, now found themselves at the mercy of an enemy they hadn't even considered. The Voran warlords shouted for an immediate counterstrike, while the Exilith Consortium demanded negotiations. But none of them had control anymore. And in that moment, Kane made a decision. She had spent years preparing for the wrong war. Humanity had positioned itself as the great unknown, the unseen force waiting in the shadows. But now, the shadows had birthed something worse. She opened a direct channel to the Senate floor. Her voice was calm, but her words left no room for debate. "You wanted us to take a seat at your table?" she said. "Fine. But right now, we're the only ones who can keep this table from burning." The unknown fleet began to move. And for the first time, humanity wasn't the biggest mystery in the galaxy. The moment Kane's transmission ended, the unknown fleet made its move. Their ships, massive and silent, drifted into formation with eerie precision. No weapons powered up, no demands were issued. It was as if they were waiting for something, or someone. Then, without warning, every human system went dark. Across the fleet, screens flickered to static, command consoles locked, and even the Osiris Protocol went silent. The Pillar of Midnight lurched as emergency backups kicked in, but the damage was done. Every ship in the Armada had been rendered blind. A chill ran through Kane as she realized the terrifying truth. Something had hijacked humanity's most advanced systems. Even Osiris, the AI designed to be impenetrable, had been compromised. And that meant one thing. This enemy wasn't just aware of humanity. It knew them. Deep in the shadows of the Senate chamber, Director Vaughn's expression didn't change, but Kane saw it in his eyes. He understood what this meant. The game had shifted again. And now, humanity wasn't just facing an unknown enemy, they were facing something that had been watching them far longer than they had been watching the rest of the galaxy. Then the first message came through. A voice. Not alien. Not synthetic. Stand down. It wasn't a threat. It was a command. And the moment it was spoken, the unknown fleet did something no one expected. They hailed the Senate directly. The transmission filled the chamber, and as it stabilized, the entire room fell into stunned silence. Because standing there, dressed in sleek black armor marked with sigils long forgotten by history, was a human. No one had seen them leave Earth. No records existed of them in any known database. And yet, here they were, leading an armada that even the most powerful galactic factions couldn't comprehend. "Your war is over," the figure said, their voice cold, absolute. "We are the Wardens, and we are here to correct your mistakes." Kane's blood ran cold. She had spent her entire career preparing for the moment humanity would reveal itself to the galaxy. But never, not once, had she considered the possibility that they weren't the first. Somewhere in deep space, beyond the reach of any known civilization, an ancient faction of humanity had survived. Grown. Advanced beyond anything Earth had achieved. And now, for reasons still unknown, they had returned. The Senate stood frozen. The Concord's leaders, so accustomed to playing their games of control and influence, now found themselves staring at something far beyond their understanding. And Kane? For the first time in her life, she wasn't sure if humanity had just found an ally or its executioner. Then the fleet opened fire. Not at the Senate world. Not at the Concord. At humanity's own ships. The first salvos tore through humanity's fleet like they had been tailored for the job. Energy barriers collapsed in a single burst. Hulls ruptured, and entire formations crumbled before anyone had time to react. The Wardens weren't just fighting to subdue, they were dismantling every piece of human ingenuity with terrifying efficiency. Kane gritted her teeth as Pillar of Midnight rolled to evade another barrage. Reroute power to the kinetic dampeners and prepare countermeasures. "I want a full analysis of their attack patterns." The crew scrambled to comply, but deep down, she knew the truth. This wasn't a battle. This was an execution. And yet, for all their overwhelming force, the Wardens had made a mistake. They still thought of Earth's children as predictable, as limited, as lesser. Vaughn's voice cut through the chaos. "I need a line to the Concord fleet now." Kane didn't question it. Within moments, a channel opened, filled with the panicked demands of alien commanders desperately trying to coordinate a retreat. Vaughn's voice sliced through the noise. "To any fleet still operational, listen carefully. The Wardens are using predictive combat modeling. They're reacting before we make our moves. That means we have to be unpredictable. Initiate erratic vectoring, randomize fire patterns, break every tactical doctrine you've ever followed. Now." Across the battlefield, human ships twisted into seemingly suicidal maneuvers, abandoning fleet formations and turning what had been a massacre into chaos. The Concord commanders hesitated for only a moment before realizing the brutal simplicity of the strategy. Predictive combat only worked if the opponent followed a pattern. The instant the disorder began, the Warden's flawless execution started to crack. Their ships hesitated, taking its wear before they had danced through every engagement unscathed. But it still wasn't enough. Even as the tide shifted, even as humanity and the Concord fought like cornered animals, the Wardens still had the numbers, the firepower, and the knowledge of a civilization far beyond their own. That was when Kane made her call. "Activate Protocol Helios." The word sent a ripple through what remained of the human fleet. And then, from deep in the void, a new signal emerged. They had kept it hidden, even from the Concord. The final ace up humanity's sleeve. A fleet that had never been seen, never been acknowledged. The Osiris Ghosts. Ships without crew. Vessels built with one purpose: to fight a war that no living being could survive. Hundreds of them materialized, their cloaks dropping as they fired at point-blank range. Warden ships exploded in clusters, their previously unbreakable formations shattering as a new kind of unpredictability entered the battle. Machines, built by humans, thinking like humans but bound by no hesitation, no fear. The Wardens staggered. For the first time since they arrived, they hesitated. And that was all humanity needed. But just as victory seemed within reach, a final transmission echoed across every channel. A voice, cold and inhuman, spoken not by the Warden commander, but from something deeper. Something older. You were never the first. And you will not be the last. At the edge of the system, something stirred. Something even the Wardens had feared. And just like that, the real enemy awakened. The silence after the battle was heavier than the destruction left behind. Warden ships drifted in the void, broken and lifeless, their once perfect formations shattered by the raw defiance of a species they had sought to judge. The Osiris ghosts, victorious but damaged, hovered among the wreckage, flickering between active and standby states. And yet, despite humanity's triumph, no one felt like celebrating. Kane stood on the pillar of Midnight's bridge, staring at the edge of the system, where something waited. The voice still echoed in her mind. You were never the first. And you will not be the last. Vaughn was already working, his hands moving across a console, sifting through intercepted Warden data. They weren't the architects of this war, he muttered. They were enforcers. A test. Kane's stomach twisted. A test for what? She didn't need to ask. Deep down, she already knew. The Wardens had come to judge humanity, to punish them for daring to take a seat at the galactic table. But they hadn't been acting alone. There was something older behind them, something powerful enough to make even the Wardens afraid. The surviving Concord fleets lingered in the debris field, their own forces decimated. What had once been a galactic power now looked like a shattered remnant. Their leaders would never admit it, but Kane saw the truth written in their hesitant maneuvers and delayed transmissions. They had fought alongside humanity. And for the first time, they understood why Earth had always been different. A chime broke the silence. A message this time from the Senate itself. The same Senate that had refused to acknowledge humanity's warnings. That had dismissed them, ignored them, tried to keep them in the shadows. And now they were calling for an emergency session. Kane exhaled slowly. Let me guess, she said. They want to negotiate. Vaughn gave a humorless chuckle. Something like that. For centuries, humanity had been an afterthought to the galaxy, underestimated and sidelined. Now, they were undeniable. Their technology, their willpower, their refusal to break when all logic said they should. The galaxy had seen what Earth was capable of, and that changed everything. But Kane knew this wasn't over. The Wardens were gone, but whatever had created them was still out there. Watching. Waiting. Her fingers curled into a fist. We take the seat, she said, turning to Vaughn. No more waiting. No more playing by their rules. We take it. And we make sure the next time they come for us, it's on our terms. A pause. Then Vaughn nodded. Across the system, human ships rallied, their banners now a symbol of something far greater than survival. It wasn't just about Earth anymore. It never had been. As the stars loomed ahead, one truth became clear. Humanity wasn't just a part of the galaxy now. They were ready to lead it.